And I think the most important thing for myself, thinking about these CBA negotiations, like this is the biggest one the WNBA has ever seen, and it's not something that can be messed up. And we're gonna fight for everything that we deserve, but at the same time, like we need to play basketball. That's what our fans crave, and that's what all of you crave as well. Is you want the product on the floor. And at the end of the day, that's how you make the money. That's how you're marketable. That's what the fans get excited about. That's what the fans want to show up for. So, it's business and it's a negotiation, and there has to be compromise on both sides. And, we're starting to get down to the wire of it, and it's become really important. And, obviously I want to help in any way I can, and I try to educate myself the best I can. Obviously, I can't speak to every single member. It's pretty complicated, but I think there are different things that we can find ways to say, no, like we certainly deserve that, and we're not going to compromise on that, and then other things that we can probably compromise on. But like I said, this is the biggest moment in the history of the WNBA, and I don't want that to be forgotten. Similar, it's important that we find a way to play this next season, and I think our fans and even everybody that has played in this league that has come before us deserve that as well.
The room fell silent the moment Caitlin Clark walked in. Phones buzzed outside, but inside the Union Conference Hall, every sound vanished, swallowed by the weight of what everyone already knew. This wasn't a meeting. It was an intervention. Overnight, the WNBA had tipped into chaos, and every road somehow led back to one player who never asked to be the center of it all. Merch numbers had exploded. Ratings spiked. Collectors were paying obscene prices. Caitlin's rise was rewriting money flows, power dynamics, and quiet agreements that had held the league together for years. And now the players' union was scared. Not of Caitlin herself, but of what her silence was doing to negotiations behind closed doors. Eyes tracked her every step. Veterans whispered. Rookies stared. Executives waited for a signal they couldn't demand out loud. A deal was on the table, unofficial and urgent, designed to stabilize everything before owners panicked and lines hardened. They needed Caitlin to bless it, to soften it, to save them from a fight they weren't ready to win. Caitlin felt the pressure clamp down on her chest. She had leveraged no player before her had ever held, and everyone in that room knew it. What they didn't know was whether she would use it for herself, for everyone else, or not at all. Because the moment she spoke, the balance of the entire league could tilt, and someone powerful was about to lose control. Tonight, decisions would echo forever across careers, contracts, and legacies. The story didn't start with that meeting. It started years earlier, in quiet gyms and empty arenas, when Caitlin Clark was still just a name scouts argued about instead of a force executives feared. From the moment she entered the national spotlight, the league wrapped expectations around her like armor and chains at the same time. She was marketed as the future, the clean star, the one sponsors could trust and fans could project onto. But behind the glow, the pressure was already suffocating. Veteran players watched her rise with mixed emotions. Pride, yes, but also unease. They had fought for charter flights, fair pay, visibility that took decades to claw out of indifference. Suddenly, Caitlin's presence made owners listen faster than years of bargaining ever had. It wasn't her fault, but it changed everything. Every negotiation now carried her shadow. Every demand was measured against what Caitlin might accept, what Caitlin might say, what Caitlin might refuse to say. The players' union felt it first. Membership meetings grew tense. Some players wanted to push harder, emboldened by the attention Caitlin brought. Others worried the league would weaponize her popularity to divide them, presenting concessions wrapped in praise, asking why everyone couldn't just be grateful, the way Caitlin seemed to be. Her silence became a Rorschach test. To some, it meant loyalty. To others, it felt like abandonment. Caitlin herself was caught in a psychological vice. She had grown up being told to let her game speak, to stay above the noise. Now the noise was structural. Union leaders requested casual check-ins that felt anything but casual. Owners praised her publicly while hinting privately that stability depended on her cooperation. Every compliment came with an invisible asterisk. The backstory deepened when money entered the room. Merchandising deals shattered records. Broadcast partners quietly adjusted projections. Suddenly, Caitlin's signature wasn't just a signature. It was a stabilizer. If she endorsed a deal, owners believed fans would follow. If she stayed neutral, negotiations stalled. If she opposed it, everything could burn. Older stars remembered being told they were replaceable. Caitlin was being told she was indispensable. That difference created fractures no one wanted to name out loud. Some players resented how often her name surfaced in talks that were supposed to be collective. Others defended her fiercely, pointing out how unfair it was to place the weight of an entire league on one person's shoulders. The union leadership struggled to balance it all. They needed leverage, and Caitlin was leverage personified. But they also feared alienating her. If she walked away, stayed quiet, or cut a separate path, the bargaining power could evaporate. The phrase "make a deal" began circulating in hushed tones, not as betrayal, but as survival. Caitlin sensed the shift in tone weeks before the meeting. Messages changed. Calls became more frequent. Language grew urgent. People stopped asking what she wanted and started asking what she would be willing to give up, for everyone else. That framing haunted her. Sacrifice had always been framed as virtue in women's sports. Now it felt like expectation. She replayed past moments in her mind, seeing teammates grind through seasons with little recognition, watching veterans speak up and pay for it in subtle ways. She wondered what would happen if she broke the pattern, or if she reinforced it by agreeing too easily. Either choice carried consequences that extended far beyond her own career. The emotional history pressed in from all sides. Family reminded her to protect herself. Advisors warned her about becoming a lightning rod. Fans begged her to save the league, without understanding what that actually meant. Caitlin barely slept. Every decision felt irreversible. By the time the union formally asked her to attend the closed-door session, the stakes were already unbearable. This wasn't about one contract or one season. It was about whether the league would evolve through collective power or consolidate around a single figure it could manage more easily. As Caitlin walked toward that meeting, she knew something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just a player anymore. She was a fulcrum. And the people who claimed to support her were quietly hoping she would choose stability over disruption. What none of them realized, what made the air so dangerously tight, was that Caitlin had been thinking about a third option, one that no deal could contain. And as the door closed behind her, the possibility of that option hung in the room, waiting to detonate. The tension inside the union meeting was palpable, electric, impossible to ignore. Every eye tracked Caitlin Clark as she took her seat at the head of the table, her posture immaculate, face composed, but the storm beneath simmering. Union leaders opened the discussion with practiced calm, highlighting numbers, collective bargaining points, and proposed concessions. But Caitlin wasn't just a number. She was leverage personified, and everyone knew it. The room grew uncomfortable when one veteran player leaned forward, voice low, suggesting that Caitlin consider the optics of rejecting the deal outright. Others nodded carefully, some avoiding her gaze, knowing that a single word could ripple across the league. Sponsors were watching. Owners were watching. Fans were watching. And behind every calculated glance, a single question hovered. Would Caitlin bend, or would she break the system? Caitlin listened, absorbing everything with surgical precision. She wasn't just processing numbers or rhetoric. She was reading intent. Every pause, every emphasis, every quiet glance toward her carried unspoken threats. The deal wasn't just a proposal. It was a test, a subtle form of coercion disguised as collaboration. And the stakes were staggering. Approve it, and she might stabilize the league, but at the cost of becoming the figure everyone claimed she should be. Compliant, controlled, predictable. Reject it, and chaos could erupt. Contracts delayed, negotiations collapsed, power structures rattled. Then came the first shocking twist. Midway through the meeting, a senior union official whispered, almost inaudibly, that the league had already started drafting contingency measures in case Caitlin said no. The words struck like a lightning bolt. "They're preparing a parallel deal," she muttered. "One without you." The room stiffened. Caitlin's heart raced. Every player knew what that meant. The union had counted on her to stabilize chaos. But now the league might move forward without her input, essentially sidelining her influence entirely. The revelation ignited a cascade of reactions. Some leaders muttered about legal ramifications. Others stared, speechless, calculating how fast the news could leak. Caitlin's gaze narrowed. She realized the meeting was a trap, a performance designed to pressure her while simultaneously undermining her authority. The leverage she held, the very leverage that had terrified owners and sponsors, was being threatened before her eyes. She didn't panic. Instead, she leaned back, letting silence fill the room. Every second stretched into eternity. Then she spoke, voice steady but razor-sharp, cutting through the pretense. "So the league doesn't trust the union, or me. They're planning without me?" The words hung. No one answered. That silence was deafening, confirming everything she suspected. The tension escalated outside the room as well. Reporters caught wind of murmurs. Fans began speculating in real time. Social media timelines erupted with questions and theories, some praising her courage, others framing her as reckless. The hashtag Caitlin Clark deal dominated trending lists within minutes. Analysts debated whether rejecting the union's proposal could fracture relationships irreparably. The public didn't understand the subtle manipulations at play, but they felt the stakes, and the viral chaos amplified every misstep. Inside the meeting, Caitlin's presence began to shift the power dynamics further. Her measured responses and pointed questions revealed weaknesses in the union's strategy. Some leaders faltered under scrutiny, realizing they had underestimated her understanding of the league's politics. Others shifted uncomfortably, aware that one misstatement could be used against them in media cycles that waited for scandal. Caitlin was not only asserting herself, she was asserting dominance, reclaiming a narrative that had been constructed without her consent. Then came the second layer of the twist, more devastating than the first. Union officials disclosed that some teams were threatening to bypass the union entirely if Caitlin refused to endorse the deal. The implication was clear. If she didn't cooperate, league leadership would move forward using alternative mechanisms, marginalizing her influence and undermining collective bargaining power. Caitlin understood instantly. The negotiation wasn't about compromise, it was about control. She wasn't just being asked to make a deal. She was being asked to validate a system that was prepared to ignore her entirely. The room held its collective breath. Every eye on Caitlin became a mirror of expectation and fear. The weight of history pressed down. Generations of players who had fought, suffered, and sacrificed to reach any semblance of fairness in the league. Caitlin realized that this wasn't just a personal test. It was a systemic one, and how she responded could redefine power dynamics for decades to come. She leaned forward, breaking the tense silence. Her words were calm but carried an edge that cut through decades of assumed hierarchy. If the league thinks they can move without me, they've underestimated more than my performance. They've underestimated my leverage, my platform, and the scrutiny that comes with ignoring it. The room shifted. Whispers circulated. Leaders exchanged glances. For the first time, the union recognized that Caitlin Clark wasn't just a player. They were negotiating with a force that could not be contained by traditional strategies. The first shocking twist had been revealed. The league was planning around her. The second shock was already unfolding. Caitlin refused to be sidelined. She wasn't just rejecting a deal. She was threatening to upend the entire negotiation framework. Every pause, every strategic glance, every carefully curated plan by leadership was now vulnerable to her decision. And as Caitlin rose from her seat, the room understood. The WNBA was no longer just watching a negotiation. It was watching history unfold. The ripple effects would be immediate, viral, and impossible to control. Social media feeds had already begun buzzing, pundits prepared statements, and fans speculated about the seismic implications. Caitlin had become the epicenter of a storm that threatened contracts, sponsorships, and the league's public image. By the time the meeting ended, no decision had been made, but one thing was indisputable. Caitlin Clark had the power to shape the future of the league, and the consequences of her next move would be felt far beyond the walls of the Union Hall. Players, executives, fans, and sponsors alike were poised on the edge, waiting for the next revelation. And as Caitlin walked out, her expression unreadable, the world waited, knowing one truth above all. In a league built on negotiation and perception, Caitlin Clark had just rewritten the rules. The storm had only begun, and nobody, not even the most powerful union leaders, knew how far it would reach. The fallout from that meeting hit faster than anyone expected. Within hours, internal leaks began to surface. Select journalists reported whispers that Caitlin Clark had refused to endorse the union's proposed deal, citing insufficient protections and transparency. The phrasing was vague, but the implications were devastating. Sponsors panicked. Social media exploded. Headlines alternated between praise for her courage and condemnation for jeopardizing collective progress. Every narrative attempted to control the chaos, but Caitlin was already 3 steps ahead. Inside the union, panic set in. Officials scrambled to contain the damage, scheduling follow-ups, private calls, and emergency strategy sessions. Caitlyn's silence, her calm determination, had exposed cracks in their entire approach. Every argument built on assumed compliance was now invalid. Every plan predicated on her agreement required recalibration. The realization that one player could unsettle the system had never been this obvious. And for many, it was terrifying. Then came the first major escalation. Internal memos leaked, and signed ambiguous, yet undeniable, suggesting that some teams were preparing contingency plans to operate outside union oversight if Caitlyn refused to participate. The memos referenced the union's leverage as fragile and indicated that leadership preferred her endorsement to maintain stability. In other words, she could make the deal or risk being bypassed entirely. And the audacity of this revelation sent shockwaves. A single player, refusing to play along, now held the fate of contracts, negotiations, and public perception in her hands. Caitlyn, meanwhile, wasn't intimidated. She had anticipated resistance, subtle threats, and attempts at manipulation, but the leaks confirmed her intuition. The system wasn't designed to support players. It was designed to control them. Her next move needed to be decisive, strategic, and public enough to hold leadership accountable while preserving her credibility. One misstep, and she could be painted as the villain, the disruptor, the uncooperative star. Social media turned into a battlefield. Fans debated endlessly. Analysts dissected her every gesture. Comparisons to other players, framed as benchmarks for behavior and professionalism, flooded timelines. Yet the more they tried to shape the narrative, the more Caitlyn controlled it simply by staying measured, refusing to engage with speculation, and letting facts speak through action. Every public pause became a statement. Every non-comment was interpreted as silent resistance. The league had never encountered a player wielding silence so effectively as a weapon. Then the second major twist struck. Caitlyn received an unexpected message from an insider within league leadership. A veiled threat that if she refused to cooperate, some contracts, sponsorship opportunities, and media appearances could be quietly redirected to other players, diminishing her marketability and influence. The subtlety was chilling. The language implied consequences without ever naming them. Caitlyn realized this wasn't just about a deal. It was about whether she could preserve autonomy in a system that equated compliance with reward. She convened her own circle, agents, advisors, and trusted former players, to map out her response. Every scenario was fraught with risk. Endorse the deal and compromise leverage. Refuse and risk public vilification. Go rogue and redefine the league's negotiation landscape entirely. Each choice carried seismic implications, both for herself and the broader player collective. Her analysis wasn't just about money or contracts. It was about the precedent she would set for women's sports, leadership, and the unspoken power structures within the WNBA. As the next meeting approached, the pressure escalated further. Executives attempted to manipulate optics, scheduling a public display of unity that would coincide with media coverage of Caitlyn's potential endorsement. Union leaders pleaded with her to consider the broader good, framing her autonomy as selfishness. The stakes had shifted from negotiation to narrative control, and Caitlyn recognized that the real battlefield was perception. Who controlled the story now controlled leverage, loyalty, and power. The tension reached a fever pitch during the meeting itself. Caitlyn arrived, calm but resolute, and immediately noticed subtle changes. The layout of the room, the personnel present, even the choice of seating, a psychological play designed to assert dominance. Union leaders attempted to pressure her, emphasizing collective welfare while implying consequences for noncompliance. Caitlyn listened carefully, absorbing every nuance, every micro-expression, and every strategic omission. She realized the meeting was no longer just about making a deal. It was a test of power, influence, and endurance. And then the second major twist hit like a thunderclap. An anonymous source leaked a confidential draft of the proposed deal to select journalists minutes before the meeting began. The draft contained clauses that undermined her influence, restricted her options, and imposed obligations on her without consent. The leak confirmed Caitlyn's suspicions. The union and league leadership had been preparing contingencies behind her back, using her popularity as leverage while quietly crafting constraints. The revelation was explosive, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Public discourse erupted instantly, with hashtags trending globally, framing the narrative around control, fairness, and the imbalance of power. Caitlyn now faced the ultimate decision point. Endorse the deal and maintain some influence but compromise principles. Refuse and expose systemic manipulation at the risk of retaliation. Or leverage the leaks strategically to redefine negotiations, asserting control over her own narrative while forcing transparency. Every path carried irreversible consequences. Every choice would shape not only her career, but the structural dynamics of the league itself. As the meeting concluded, all eyes were fixed on Caitlin Clark. Leadership and media alike waited for a signal, any gesture, any word that could tip the balance. She rose, collected, unyielding, with the knowledge that her next move could either stabilize a fragile system or ignite a controversy that would reverberate far beyond the league. The storm had not passed, it had only begun, and Caitlin Clark held the center of it, ready to determine who would survive, who would be silenced, and who would be rewritten entirely. The moment Caitlin Clark walked out of that union meeting, the world seemed to explode. Social media timelines filled instantly with speculation, praise, condemnation, and outright panic. Fans debated endlessly. Had she done the right thing, or had she just sabotaged the collective bargaining effort? Every comment thread, every headline, every viral clip became a microcosm of the chaos she had set in motion. The league itself was unprepared for this kind of scrutiny. Executives scrambled to craft statements, lawyers whispered about damage control, and union leaders convened emergency strategy sessions behind closed doors. Caitlin herself felt the weight of every gaze, even as she moved through her day with deliberate calm. Behind her composed exterior, emotions roiled. Anger at the betrayal she'd uncovered, exhaustion from the pressure of expectation, fear for the potential consequences. Every decision she had made, every step she had taken, had placed her at the center of a storm with no clear end. Fans and media projected narratives onto her like wildfire, and she had to navigate them carefully, knowing a single misstep could be used against her. The public fallout wasn't limited to social media. Sponsors began sending quiet inquiries through intermediaries. Some expressed support for her bravery, while others hinted at concern over perceived disruption to league operations. Merchandise sales and endorsements, once booming, now came under intense scrutiny. Broadcasters debated the implications for upcoming coverage and feature segments. Every external observer was forced to ask, could the WNBA survive if one player held this much power? Meanwhile, internal league dynamics fractured visibly. Some players admired Caitlin's courage, but worried about the long-term consequences. Others questioned whether she had overstepped, risking not just her career but collective bargaining strength. Coaches and executives watched the ripple effects in locker rooms, group chats, and team meetings, realizing the tension was contagious. The WNBA, built on solidarity and professionalism, suddenly felt like a tinderbox waiting for the slightest spark. The Caitlin Clark comparison, already a recurring narrative, intensified. Analysts scrutinized her calm under pressure versus other players' compliance, framing it as a standard all others were expected to meet. Fans debated endlessly whether she was a hero, a disruptor, or simply smart enough to play the game differently. Meanwhile, Caitlin remained silent publicly, letting facts speak for themselves and strategically choosing which narratives to confront directly. That measured approach amplified the tension, as silence became as loud and influential as any statement could be. Emotionally, the aftermath was brutal. Caitlin had always carried the weight of expectations, but now it was magnified exponentially. Every decision she made could shift public perception, contract negotiations, and sponsorship opportunities. She was praised, criticized, dissected, and elevated simultaneously. Her mental and emotional stamina were tested relentlessly as she navigated both the visible fallout and the unseen maneuvers behind closed doors. This wasn't just about making a deal. It was about proving she could survive the firestorm that came with holding power in a system designed to contain it. The media frenzy fueled the tension further. Pundits speculated about whether Caitlin's silence was a strategic masterstroke or reckless defiance. Opinion pieces drew historical parallels, citing cases where single players had disrupted negotiations or shifted league dynamics. Headlines oscillated between celebrating her courage and warning about the dangers of unilateral influence. The public discourse had shifted from negotiation to spectacle, and Caitlin was the central figure in a drama that had become viral, real-time theater. Inside union offices, anxiety reached new heights. Leaders realized that their authority had been undermined. not by a player refusing to follow rules, but by a player refusing to be controlled. Emergency calls were made to secure support, clarify messaging, and anticipate potential escalations. Sponsors and partners were briefed in a frenzy, with executives attempting to predict and contain reactions that were now beyond their control. The situation had evolved from negotiation to narrative warfare, and Caitlyn's presence at the center made every reaction magnified. Fans, meanwhile, were divided but fully engaged. Hashtags surged, threads trended, and debates erupted over the ethics of Caitlyn's stance. Some praised her as a visionary, others condemned her as reckless. Every analysis, retweet, and comment added fuel to a fire no one could contain. The public discourse itself became part of the strategy, amplifying both her influence and the league's crisis. Caitlin Clark had not just disrupted negotiations, she had reshaped perception itself. And yet, despite the chaos, Caitlin remained calculated. Her silence, her timing, her controlled interactions created a quiet but undeniable leverage. Everyone watching realized that the next move could either stabilize or destroy reputations, partnerships, and career trajectories. The fallout was not just public, it was systemic, emotional, and psychological, affecting players, executives, and fans alike. Caitlin had stepped into a position of unparalleled influence, and the world was waiting for her next move. But as the storm raged, a whisper of an even greater revelation began circulating. The union and league were hiding more than they had revealed. Something deeper, more explosive, was lurking, something that could redefine the balance of power entirely. And Caitlin Clark knew that when it surfaced, nothing would ever be the same. Just when the public believed they had seen the full scope of the drama, the final twist landed, like a hammer striking glass. Late one evening, Caitlin Clark's agent received an encrypted message from an anonymous source within the league. The contents were explosive: a full internal report detailing the union's private negotiations, emails from executives planning contingency measures if Caitlin refused to sign, and leaked documents showing how sponsorships, media appearances, and player allocations had been quietly rerouted to manipulate leverage. This wasn't just a negotiation. It was an orchestration designed to force her compliance while erasing any hint of dissent. Caitlin stared at the screen, heart racing, mind calculating. The league had been prepared to bend every rule, shift every narrative, and exploit every relationship to neutralize her influence. They had underestimated her. They assumed silence or compliance would be enough. But this was proof of the structural manipulation at play. And now, she had the power to expose it all. She didn't act immediately. Every detail had to be verified, every source confirmed. Releasing anything too soon could trigger legal backlash, career sabotage, or public misinterpretation. But she felt a surge of resolve. The league was playing a dangerous game, and she had the chance to rewrite it on her terms. Word of the leak spread quickly among journalists and insiders. Social media speculation exploded. Fans demanded answers. Analysts debated the implications. Every headline, every clip, every opinion became a high-stakes chess move. Caitlin realized that her silence had become a weapon far more powerful than any contract or endorsement. The league was no longer in control, she was. But the pressure intensified when another revelation arrived. The league had already begun drafting what they called emergency amendments to player contracts, targeting stars whose influence could derail planned deals. Caitlin's name was highlighted repeatedly. It was a thinly veiled warning: cooperate or risk career consequences. The message was clear, cold, and deliberate. Caitlin convened her inner circle immediately. Legal advisors, trusted former players, and her agent debated the strategy. Every option was fraught. Public exposure could trigger retaliation. Silence could allow manipulations to continue unchecked. And yet, the weight of truth pressed down. She couldn't let them continue manipulating careers behind closed doors. Not for her. Not for anyone else. Then came the most shocking revelation. One of her closest allies within the union had been feeding selective information to executives, shaping negotiations in ways designed to marginalize Caitlin while making it seem like consensus. Betrayal, quiet, methodical, and almost invisible, cut deeper than any public criticism. Caitlin now understood the full extent of the forces aligned against her. Executives, unions, rival players, and sponsors, all intertwined in a delicate dance of control. The cliffhanger crystallized as Caitlin drafted her next move. She had three choices: leak the documents publicly, confront the league privately, or engineer a strategic compromise that could redefine power structures permanently. Each path carried enormous risk. Each path could change the league forever. And every decision had to be timed perfectly. One misstep, one early release, one misinterpreted gesture, and the fallout could destroy her career, her relationships, and the future of women's basketball negotiations. As she leaned back, contemplating the storm she now commanded, Caitlin realized something terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, she wasn't negotiating within the system. She was the system's pivot point. Every move she made would ripple across the league, redefine leadership dynamics, and force players, executives, and fans alike to reckon with power in a way they never had before. Her phone buzzed. A direct message from an unknown source. "They know what you have. Are you ready to play?" Caitlin stared at the screen, a calm smile forming even as adrenaline surged. The world waited for her answer, but she knew one truth. Whatever she did next would not just make headlines. It would reshape the league entirely. And then the screen went black. The next chapter hadn't begun yet. But when it did, everything and everyone would be forced to reckon with Caitlin Clark.